Hey, Em, how are you doing, girl? It's Miguel. Thank you for joining me again. I really appreciate this time we get to share together. I think it's important for us to, come together and enjoy each other's company and learn about each other and experience what it is to be in each other's presence. This is a wonderful time, a valuable time, and it's a time that I cherish, a time that I cherish spending with you. And I'm excited about it. Okay, so let's see. One thing I want to start with is reading Peaceful Living, the book by Mary McKenzie. Today is September 27th. It is a Thursday, and it is approximately 6 in the morning. Well, maybe it's more like 7 in the morning. And so let's see what Mary McKenzie has to say today. Her quote for today, September 27th, is, "What is a cynic? A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing." Oscar Wilde. So the subtitle for this passage is Relating to the Value of Things Rather Than the Cost. How much is that class worth to you? How about that blouse or new wallet? So many of us decide worth based on outside influences. When we make spending decisions, I suggest we base them on the value we receive from that item or service. I have a massage therapist who comes to my house and gives the best massage I have ever experienced. She charges me $45 for a 90-minute massage. I pay her $60. Not because I have to, but because I receive so much value from the massage that it doesn't meet my need for integrity to pay her $45. Similarly, when I was starting as a trainer of nonviolent communication, I interned with a trainer in another city. He allowed me to go to all his trainings for free as part of my internship. Many times I paid him for the classes because I received so much value from them and because I wanted to contribute to his life. The exchange of resources, that is, exchanging of money for an item or service, is enhanced and better appreciated when we are connected to its personal value. Consider shifting your focus from what something costs to the value it brings into your life. So, the thought for the day is, be aware today of a struggle you may have had about whether to buy an item or service. Consider whether its value to you is worth the investment. Well, that sounds like an interesting idea. I'm afraid I don't have much to say about that subject. Yeah, I like the idea of focusing less on the cost, the economic cost of something. You know, we tend to focus a lot about the economic cost of a lot of things in our culture. It's about the value of money. But a lot of the time, things cost what they cost because of market forces. And market forces aren't exactly anything that we can control. And so really, in a sense, the cost of something is somewhat, well, it's uncontrollable and it's somewhat arbitrary. The cost of something, it depends on these market forces, which are not in our control. And, they're part of what I'd call a mass decision-making process. That is a bunch of people getting together and making decisions about what they think something costs. And then, at that point, the market price is fixed. All that's actually fairly arbitrary. It actually is not strongly related to, say, the value of an object to me personally. The value of an object to me personally has to do with the needs that it meets. When I obtain an object, I value that object in certain ways. There's certain needs that it meets for me when I receive it and use it. And so how important is it for me to meet those particular needs? In a way, it's hard to quantify because these evaluations are subjective. You know, for example, water. I value water because it meets my need to satisfy my thirst. Now, how much is that worth? I don't know. How important is it that I satisfy my thirst? $5? $10? Is it worth $10 for me to satisfy my thirst? How about $1,000,000? Well, it's actually really hard to tell. It's very important, and depending on, it really depends on how thirsty I happen to be in the moment, right? And the degree of thirst that I have. It's so it's a little slippery. And you know what? Really, there is an exchange of money for water. I'm I'm not sure what the pure logic of it is. I guess my point is that I like this idea of thinking about the desires that will be met and the needs that will be met and the wants that will be met by things, and just not focusing on the money so much. Because, a lot of the time the money is just fairly arbitrary. You know, it is a decision-making process about, whether you're willing to exchange so much money for a certain value. And, that's an interesting question. But, the market forces change, the economics change all the time. And, that's a question that can only be answered in a certain context. All right. So, let's move on to the telling of my life story. Why not? So, where did we leave off last time? Well, last time we left off when my mom and dad met. And so I'm guessing now my mom and dad are still alive. So I'm still, if you recall, still contemplating year zero. And I'm giving you some backstory about my life story. And I'm really just talking just about a few years before I was actually born. And I was, in the previous video, I was talking about the ancestry of my father and my mother and where they were raised. My mom born in Long Beach, California. And I may not have really even touched on where my dad was born. My dad was born in Taos, New Mexico. My mom was born, her name was Barbara Jean Gibson. Jean was her middle name. And my dad was born Benny Angelo Trujillo. And we call him Ben. I think Benny is the name on his birth certificate. So my dad was born in Taos, New Mexico. And, my dad, based on what I know, he grew up in Taos, New Mexico. And then I think he might have been drafted in the military, in the army. And then I think he went to live in California for a while, getting a job there. And then he returned from California back to Taos. And so I was mentioning about the time when my mom and dad first met. And the story as I know it has to do with both my mom and dad being Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, I mentioned previously that Jehovah's Witnesses are a Christian religion. They are a rather small Christian religion. Their origin story really, the story of Jehovah's Witnesses really began in the late 1800s. A lot of Protestant religions, smaller Protestant religions began just about that time, like the Seventh-day Adventists, and there were others developing in the mid to late 1800s. I'm guessing maybe perhaps the Amish perhaps started about that time. There were a lot of fledgling Protestant religions that developed around that time. And Jehovah's Witnesses were one of them. And both my mom and dad were Jehovah's Witnesses. And my dad acquired his belief in religion and in Jehovah's Witnesses when he was in jail. He was in jail for a time because he was a conscientious objector for the Vietnam War. And I think that while he was in prison, he got to know about Jehovah's Witnesses. He had a few Bible studies. And when he got out of prison and moved back to Taos, he continued in his service as a Jehovah's Witness there. My mom came from a long line of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I believe she was a fourth generation Jehovah's Witness by the time, say, the 1970s came around. And she was, I think both my mom and my dad were pioneers, which means in Jehovah's Witness lingo, it means that they were out proselytizing and knocking on doors, going from house to house, and trying to, develop new members of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And what got my mom and dad together was that they were both supporting the development of a new church in the Taos area. And I forget about what small town they were in, but they were both pioneers, and so they had that in common. Like, my dad lived in Taos, which was a nearby town, and my mom, I think her family was in Arizona at the time. And so my mom pioneered in the adjacent state, New Mexico, in northern New Mexico. I think she got to know about this developing congregation. And so my mom and dad met as pioneers, as Jehovah's Witnesses, developing this fledgling congregation. And I don't know much about the early days of their relationship, but eventually they ended up getting married and then having me as their firstborn child. Now, I was born in May 1971, May 27th, and that makes me a Gemini. And so I think my mom and dad, their ages when I was born, I'm thinking they were about 23, 25 years old when they had me. And so they were a young couple. I think at the time they might have been a little older than, I think normally people got married at a very young age when, back in the 1970s, probably during their early 20s or mid 20s. And so, yeah. So, let's pin it down. I was born, and so I was born in Espanola, New Mexico. That was the city, and this I have heard some interesting stories about my birth, and so I'll relate them to you. So at the time, my mom and dad were living in Taos, and that's when my mom became pregnant with me. And there was a plan for me to be born at one of the big hospitals in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is about a 2.5 hour drive away from the town of Taos. The reason, I'm not very clear on the reason, but I think it had to do with these superior facilities in Albuquerque, that hospital. I think the hospital in the big city was thought to be the place to have a baby. And maybe there was a university at that time. Perhaps it was the University Hospital in Albuquerque that they were shooting for. Both my mom and dad were shooting for having me at that hospital. But there were some. But when the day arrived, when it was time for me to be born, you know, my mom and dad hopped in the car and they left house on their way to the hospital in Albuquerque. And they didn't quite make it all the way. The town of Espanola is between Taos and Albuquerque. And so, as I understand it, I was born in a small clinic just outside of Espanola. My dad had to pull over the car, find the clinic, and get my mom into the clinic because she was having a baby, and she was having a baby right then and there. Now, I remember stories about how complicated my birth was. I think there was trouble getting me outside the womb. So my father, I recall him telling a story about how he had to take these calipers, these spoons, and sort of grab my head with them and pull me out. And in fact, I remember my dad mentioned that as my mom was lying on the table and he had these spoons around my head, that he actually tried to pull me out, and to do that he braced himself by pulling his leg up on the table and using his leg to help force me out. So it was actually a fairly athletic birth. I think they're called forceps. My dad was using forceps, and why my dad was using forceps and not the clinician in the clinic, I'm not quite sure. And then I've been told that when I exited the womb and I was out, I had trouble breathing. I wasn't breathing. In fact, I was somewhat blue when I came out and was not breathing. And that my dad remembers distinctly him taking me by the ankles with his hand and slapping my bottom while I was upside down to get me breathing. And eventually I did start breathing. And, wow, what an amazing story. So that was what I would call a somewhat complicated birth. To have my own father birthing me and not the doctor who perhaps was nearby doing other things. I'm not sure. So anyway, that's the story of my birth and what I know about it. It was fairly complicated, and I had trouble getting out of the womb, and I had trouble breathing. Anyway, so actually have tried in the past to return to the place of my birth. I have driven to Espanola, around the outskirts there, fairly north of Espanola, looking for the clinic where I was born. And I was just thinking the other day that it might be a good idea for me to drive out there with my mom and have my mom pinpoint the exact location of my birth, because even today I'm a little bit uncertain about where the location of the clinic is. Now, I mentioned I did try to search it out. I had heard that the clinic closed down and was replaced by a bar or a liquor store. That somehow a bar or liquor store rose up in its place at this defunct medical clinic. And I was able, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was able to drive by that area, and I think I did find what I'd call an old abandoned liquor store. And one thing I noticed was that the building was actually rather small. And so I'm not entirely convinced that I found the right building. Essentially, the building I found was like a brown building, and it had some, it seemed to be rather beat up, and I think it had some kind of liquor store lettering on it, and it was certainly abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and I guessed that perhaps that was the place where I was born. Like I said, I think what I'd like to do is bring my mom out there to Espanola and ask her to pinpoint that location. For me, I think it's significant. I would like to know, just for trivial information's sake. So I was born, and that begins the year zero, right? I was born, and apparently my mom and dad, after my mom had recovered from the birth, I think it was just a regular vaginal birth. After my mom recovered, then they drove back home from Espanola back to Taos, where they lived. And there I grew up for a little while. I went probably from age 0 to age 1 or 2. And then my understanding is that my family moved from Taos to Santa Rosa, New Mexico. In fact, the earliest memories that I have happened when I think I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. The very earliest memories. And those very, very earliest memories I have of, say, let's call it 3.5, was memories that occurred in Santa Rosa. So the way I understand it is that my mom and dad lived, I think, at first in an apartment complex in Santa Rosa, and then a home in Santa Rosa. And I might have that mixed up. It might have started out as a home, and then later in an apartment complex they lived. Or maybe they just lived in a home altogether. Remember, I'm only 3.5 years old. Now, my first memories consist of me walking around this home in Santa Rosa. I have some pretty clear memories of me, and this is my earliest memory, of me walking around in the hall and in the bedroom, or in the rooms, like the living room and kitchen of this home in Santa Rosa. And there are other things that I remember about Santa Rosa too. I think I'm thinking about age 4 and 5. I'm in Santa Rosa, And I can think of other memories. A lot more memories are cropping up in my mind when I'm like 4 and 5 years old. For example, some memories I have are a spaghetti dinner that, or I was a kid and it was in an apartment complex in Santa Rosa, and I was playing outside in the apartment complex's playground, and we were having they were relatives or friends, and we were all sitting around the table, and there was a high chair involved, and there were bibs and people eating spaghetti in a group around a table. And additional memories I have are the Kingdom Hall in Santa Rosa. I've got a lot of memories about the Kingdom Hall in Santa Rosa. Now, the Kingdom Hall is the name of the church building where Jehovah's Witnesses services are presented. And I have really vivid memories of what happened in Santa Rosa. I have vivid memories of the construction that took place. I think Santa Rosa was building its own congregation there. That might have been part of the motivation for both my mom and dad going to Santa Rosa. Again, helping out a new Jehovah's Witness congregation, a fledgling congregation get on its feet, and they were helping support it. I think I remember building. Oh yeah, I remember two congregations. But I remember construction taking place inside this congregation. I remember certainly carpets and concrete pad, and I can remember noises of building equipment and construction equipment, and I just remember everyone in a suit. I remember being there with my brothers. At the time, here I am, 4 years old. I think I've got one or two younger brothers at the time too. So I remember playing with them and chasing them around the Kingdom Hall, and I remember making friends, and I remember just running around the chairs before the service. And so I have a lot of vivid memories about me living in Santa Rosa about the age 4 or 5 years old. Yeah. And I remember Santa Rosa as being quite an ideal time for me. I enjoyed quite a bit of it, if I recall. And I also remember wearing secondhand clothing. And particularly brown vests and brown pants. And I think I can remember tennis shoes. So I've got snippets of memories when I'm 4 and 5 years old in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. And I also have vivid memories of my family and other families and friends there. Yeah. So that's me about 4 or 5 years old in Santa Rosa with my mom and dad, and I think probably two other younger brothers. And so yeah, we were there in Santa Rosa living our lives, and then eventually we moved back to Taos. Oh, yeah. So no, actually, I think we moved to Albuquerque. So I'm thinking we moved to Albuquerque. So here I am, about 5 years old, and at 5 years old, we're living in Albuquerque, and I remember going to Sombre del Monte Elementary School. Oh, I also remember going to Lava Land. Okay, so Lava Land and Sombre del Monte are both elementary schools, and they are both in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And these are the schools that I was enrolled in when I was 5 years old. So, okay. So, yes, I'm talking about Sombra del Monte and Lava Land elementary schools in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I have a lot of, I think Lava Land was the first school I went to. I think that was the school that I went to some kindergarten in. And I remember a few things about that place. I remember the school where we had like popcorn. There was a popcorn machine that we enjoyed eating snacks at. I can remember being in class and eating popcorn as a kindergartner. I can also remember playing games like Tiddlywinks and Pick-Up Sticks at Lava Land Elementary School. I can also remember doing some kind of math or learning about numbers, doing some kind of test or quiz relating to adding numbers. I think it was knowing numbers and adding numbers. I remember taking quizzes or tests at Lava Land Elementary School. I can also remember eating lunch at Lava Land Elementary School. I also remember really enjoying the elementary school. That was a really awesome elementary school, Lava Land. I had a really good time at school. I was in kindergarten at the time, and I remember the classrooms and what they looked like, and I remember the lunchroom and what it smelled like. And so I've got pretty vivid memories about, this is about me being 5 years old in Albuquerque, New Mexico, going to school for the first time. Yeah. So I think I'm going to stop right there. Here I am talking about 5 years old. Let's see, what else can I relate about my experience as a young boy? Well, I'm not sure. So, my mom and dad, you know, I'm not sure if there's much to relate about it, my early years living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, what's interesting to note is here I am 5 years old and we've already moved a few places. Like I was living in Taos and then I lived in Santa Rosa for a little while and now I'm living in Albuquerque. And later on, I'm gonna mention that I moved back to Taos again. So the progression is Taos, Santa Rosa, Albuquerque, and then back to Taos again. So we did move around quite a bit, and there's even more movement because we moved to Taos and then we moved back to Albuquerque. So there's a lot of back and forthing, and I hope that I get it straight. Only my mom and dad can really relate to you all the moves that we had and where we lived at the time. Remember, I'm only 5 years old, so I don't really have a strong sense of where we are, where we're living, and where I'm going. I just have sort of vague understandings, vague notions of where I am. But I certainly am in New Mexico. And here I'm at Lava Land in Albuquerque. And it's been a long time since I've visited Lava Land. Last year, I did go to Sombra del Monte, and I'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about my experiences at Sombra del Monte Elementary School. Why I went to two elementary schools in Albuquerque at about the same time, I'm really not sure about the reasons behind that. But it's kind of interesting. So I'm not sure if thankfully things were relatively smooth going for me as a kid. I didn't necessarily have any tragedy or odd things related to my growing up at a very young age, 5 or 6 years old. So that's good to know. And so far so good. So so what else did I want to mention? Let's see what's going on in my life right now. Well, today is Thursday, and later on today I'll be going to my jewelry making class. I'll be doing some silversmithing. I'm finishing up a ring that I produced last week, and I'll be forming another item of jewelry. I'll be forming a pendant for a necklace, and believe it or not, it's going to be a gift for you. And so I'm going to keep it a little bit of a secret, and so I'm going to be producing a gift for you, and probably be mailing it maybe sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I want to get it looking nice, and so that's something you can anticipate. So yeah, I'm going to my jewelry making class. Tomorrow I'm going to help a friend transport a motorcycle from Santa Barbara to Lompoc. And then I'm having another friend visit this weekend. So I've got an interesting weekend going on. One thing that I'm interested in doing this weekend is I want to go dancing, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to pull that together. I have a few opportunities to go dancing, but in a way they're kind of far away. There's a dancing venue in Cambria at the Joslin Center, and that's Friday night, and I think I might try to make that. But the thing is about that is that the drive is a little long. It's about an hour and a half from Lompoc to Cambria. And so I'm asking myself, do I really want to drive an hour and a half to dance at this venue in Cambria? And then at 9 o'clock p.m. when the dancing ends, I'll have to drive back. And, that itself will take an hour and a half, which means that I won't get home until like 11:30 p.m. Or actually maybe 10:30 p.m. So that's not too bad. Anyway, that's something I'm considering, going dancing. I guess that would be tomorrow. So I've got a midterm coming up for my machining class. So I'm going to be studying for that class over the next few days. In fact, every day I've already got my study materials worked out, and I'm going to probably try to memorize the material that I'm studying over the next, 3 or 4 days. My midterm is next Monday evening. And so I don't have a lot of time to study. I just have today, which is Thursday. That is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday. So, that's a good 5 days of study time. That ought to be plenty of time for me to completely absorb the material. So far, I'm doing rather well in my machining class. I think I've got an A. I think I've submitted all the homework, and I'm doing a stellar job. And machining isn't the most difficult class, but what I'm finding is that the class moves fairly rapidly through the material. And so I'm not getting enough time to read and absorb the information in the textbook. So I'm having to cope with that. And it's kind of funny, I really do wish that I would spend more time reading, but I'm super busy. I'm doing all kinds of things. I really need to sit down and do my studying and read my textbook. So I think that's a commitment that I want to make in the future. Just to sit down and focus on the material that I want to learn. And there's a lot of informative material in that machining textbook. Now, I'm also developing skills related to putting material in a lathe and using the lathe to machine the part, and putting the material in the vertical mill and machining using the milling machine. And later on, I'll probably be using a CNC machine And so I'm learning a lot of practical skills in the machine shop. And I guess that's probably the most important thing. Learning those hands-on skills. And so, I'm happy about that. It's funny, in most other classes, I'm focused on the textbook material and learning the vocabulary words and the the information in the textbook. In this machining class, I'm more focused on developing the skills of working the machines. And I think the teacher recognizes that as being the case. That really, I'm there to learn how to use the machines in the machine shop. And the information in the textbook, while important, while I'm doing homework and studying to taking an exam, the real test of success in that class is whether I can run those machines. Yeah. So that's good. I like that. For me, that's a unique focus. That's a focus that that is rather new to me. By the way, I'm thinking about what classes I may take next semester. I'm thinking about perhaps taking a Photoshop class. I tend to use software like that to improve the photographs that I take with my camera, and when I post those photographs to social media. And I like this idea of touching up the photographs. I'm finding that I pretty much touch up every photograph that I put on social media. I'm changing the brightness or the contrast or the exposure or changing the focus. I'm almost always cropping the photograph to make sure that I've got the subject of the photo directly in the photo where I want the subject in the photo. So I'm cropping the material, and I'm thinking that having Photoshop skills would help me sort of express myself in an artful way, and in a way that sort of addresses the values that I want to express in my art and my photographic art. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. I was thinking of perhaps about learning how to weld and taking a welding class, but I'm thinking now that my interest in Photoshop is more energetic than my interest in taking a welding class. I know that I can exercise those skills of using Photoshop pretty much every day or every other day, whereas skills related to welding, when will I use those skills? I'm really not entirely convinced that I'll use them at all. Now, that's not going to stop me from taking the class eventually. I certainly will. But I think from a practical perspective, knowing how to use Photoshop to merge my videos and to do it for my photographs, to manipulate my photographs and manipulate my videos, I think would be really helpful for me right now. That's a skill that I could definitely do some learning in and developing in. So anyway, Emily, I just want to thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope things are going well for you in your world. I hope things are going well in school. I've been hearing some reports from other teachers and other parents that there is a flu bug going around. People are getting sick, and I hope that you're feeling healthy now and that you're not sick. I myself got a flu shot the other day, so I'm feeling protected from the flu and its many variants. So I'm feeling confident that I probably won't get sick this year. And I'm curious if you've gotten the flu shot yourself. I think it's a worthy practice to get a flu shot every year. It's about maintaining your health, and it's about also avoiding any unnecessary risk related to being out of school or being out of work because you're sick. Being sick is kind of a drag. Who needs that anyway? I certainly don't need that. I don't want that. I would rather conduct my life in a healthy way and be healthy all the time. Why not, right? So anyway, like I mentioned, thank you very much for spending this time with me, and I'll catch you next time. I love you, girl. Peace.